Okay, so welcome everyone. So we're going to be uploading this on a couple of different platforms. So I'm just going to introduce myself and also the person that I'm talking with today. So my name's Nick and I'm a professional tarot reader from Sydney, Australia, and I run a business called Malakhim Tarot. And today I'm very fortunate to have Wahid Azal here, who is the founder and Grand Sheikh of the Fatimiyya Sufi Order. And we're going to be talking about a whole range of things, and including a tarot deck towards the end. But did you want to start by maybe telling people a little bit about your background and the Fatimiyya Sufi Order?
Sure. I'll start with the Bismillah in the name of God. Since we're here in Oz, I should mention the fact that the Fatimiyya Sufi Order is Australia's first indigenously born Sufi order. Although I'm an Iranian American, my parents moved out here in the 1980s, and then I subsequently made my way over here as well. I had been working with a Sufi sheikh who actually had permissions from 3 different Iranian Shiite Sufi orders. He passed away in 1998, and he gave permissions to 3 of his disciples. I was one of them, to continue his work. Now, with me, it was very interesting because this individual was not just a Sufi, your average run-of-the-mill Sufi murshid. He was also a secretly practicing Azali Babi, a secret member of the Bayani community, which is a post-Islamic Shiite religion, if you would, which Baha'ism is actually a schism of during the 19th century. And this was a very esoteric creed, and from what he disclosed to me, was that a lot of these people from around the 20th century onwards went into the Sufi orders in a very similar fashion that you found the same thing happening after the fall of Alamut, the Ismaili stronghold in central Iran. You had a lot of Ismailis going into the Sufi orders because the Azali Babis were the most persecuted religious community of the 19th century in Iran, and not just by the mullahs, but also by their schismatic rivals. The Baha'is, they all went into, a lot of them went into different areas, a lot of them went into the Sufi orders, and he was one of these people. My own family background has a pedigree in this faith, in the Bayani or the Azali Babi community, because my great ancestor, great-great-great-great-grandmother, Tahira Quratul Ain, was a leading disciple of the Babs, of the primary points. So, but my family had subsequently become secularized Iranians with a Baha'i affiliation. And I basically broke away from the Baha'i organization in the 90s, officially. I had problems with it from the beginning. In fact, I don't even look at it as a religion at all, but rather as a cult. And subsequently became the most prominent critic of this organization outside of Iran itself. But one thing that he tasked me with is that if it was possible to basically continue his work in fusing the Sufi path with the teachings of the Bayan. And that is what happened. But it happened in a very unique way because about 4 years after his passing, a lot of my visionary work and meditation started gaining ground in the area of the divine feminine. It was very spontaneous. It's not something I actually went out looking for. It just kind of happened. And in November of 2002, I was still at law school at the time at QUT here in Brisbane. And I was traveling from the Gold Coast where I was living at the time to Brisbane to actually sit for an exam that morning. And I started doodling just very spontaneous verses in Arabic where the gender of God was changed from he to she in Arabic, in my doodling. And there was a phrase that just, literally was, I hesitate to use this word channeling because it is so loaded. But I'll use the even more loaded term, revealed. This should push a lot of buttons with a lot of Orthodox folks. A verse was revealed to me while I was sitting on the Brisbane City train, and the verse was, "Hi Allah Nur al Hay al Ishq bi Samawati wal Ard." She is God, or the Godhead, the light of the living love in the heavens and the earth. And the minute I took the pen from the piece of paper on the train stopped dead in its tracks. Then they announced on the intercom of the train that there was a massive electrical failure on the tracks in between the Gold Coast and Brisbane. And we sat there for about an hour and a half or so until the electricity got back going. We made our way to Brisbane. You can actually verify this information because it happened at 6:35 a.m. on the morning of November 7th, 2002, on the Brisbane City train. And from there, a lot of different things happened. There was an area in the Gold Coast hinterland that became sort of my axis mundi, as it were, where today it is sort of like the Qibla of the Fatimiyya, if you would. In this area that has this very, very animate tree that I have labeled as the tree of life. In this area that I have also then dubbed the Valley of Nur, the Valley of Light. And a lot of things happened. That the land here, especially the indigenous areas of this land here, really nurtured this. So it was as if there was a fusion between the spirituality, the Shiite spirituality, or the heterodox Shiite spirituality of Iran, with the indigenous Aboriginal spirituality of the land here.
That's awesome.
So that's how this all kind of came together. So the Fatimiyya Sufi order is Australia's firstborn Sufi order.
Australian-made Sufi order. One of the little green triangles with the kangaroo on it or something.
Yeah. And this land is very spiritualized. I mean, yes, Australia is a white settler colony, and it has had superimposed the European Anglo-Saxon culture on it, but underneath that you have a 40, 50, 70, 80,000 year indigenous
so old
culture that is much older than anything that happened in Europe. And the spirits of this land literally embraced me. It was very interesting. I've described the phenomena here to certain Aboriginal elders from time to time. They're even awed by the relationship that I have had with the land here. So this is the Holy Land as far as the Fatimiyya is concerned. People can go to Mecca or Jerusalem, but here in Southeast Queensland, this is the Holy Land.
Nice, very nice. And so you mentioned the divine feminine, and obviously for people who don't know, Fatimiyya, like that comes from the name Fatima. And so there is like a big emphasis on the divine feminine and a connection to Fatima herself, isn't there, within the order?
Yes. And there is a pedigree in this within esoteric Shiism already. You have various traditions and hadith about the stature of Fatima. There's a very important hadith that I quoted in my interview with Reality Sandwich in 2014. And the hadith goes as follows. God speaking in the first person says to the prophet, "O Ahmad, were it not for you, I would have not created the universe. And were it not for Ali, I wouldn't have created you. And were it not for Fatima, I wouldn't have created either of you." So this raises the stature of the divine feminine and the archetype of Fatima to beyond a cosmic level, to a metacosmic level, as you would. And there are contexts of this, obviously, beyond the world of Islam and the Abrahamic religions already. For example, in the Shakta tantric tradition of India, which is older than even the Shaivite tradition, the Shakti is known as the Parashakti or a Mahashakti. So the goddess is the godhead, as it were. So that context already exists in the pre-Shaivite tantrism of the subcontinent. But this has showed up everywhere. And with me, it showed up spontaneously. And why this spirit chose, to channel its will through me is still something I'm working out to this day. But it has been present since that time of 2002. And it's literally, in a way, it's as it were, it is like rebirthing Islam on this land in a new form, in a post-Islamic format. Now, this is obviously extremely challenging to a lot of the Orthodox folks that would immediately denounce it as heresy, etc. I don't care because, as far as I'm concerned, the grace of the All-High does not abide within these communities anymore. They've had their day. They are, spiritual shells, as it were. And the proof is in the pudding, and the pudding is in the eating. So that's my perspective.
Fair enough. Yeah. Okay. And something I've been really enjoying lately is I've listened to a lot of podcasts you've been on, your YouTube videos, and talking about the occult side of the Islamic culture, so magic in particular. And Looking at, there's a bit of a difference in the relationship between Islam and magic compared to the Christian world. And also, do we want to start by maybe talking about, because magic isn't a word that actually comes across well into Arabic, is it?
Well, there is no neutral word in Arabic for magic. See, that's part of the problem. Now, before we get into that, I should first say that there are multiple perspectives on this stuff. Unfortunately, sure. Because the dominant Sunni orthodoxy seems to want to represent itself as the monolithic perspective on Islam and the Islamic world as a whole, it kind of has created a bias in the community that magic is something that is verboten in Islam. When you enter the world of esoteric Shiism and even the mainstream Shiism of the Hausa, it's very different. And because we have transmissions from the Imams, the infallibles, where they are actually transmitting theurgical practices very consistently. For example, one of the most prominent of these is the symbol of the greatest name, which I have, emblazoned on my Facebook page.
Yeah, we've got our
here. That right there, that is a symbol of the greatest name. That is basically the entirety of our doctrine encapsulated in the symbol, which we meditate on, and what have you. And this was transmitted by Ali, alayhi salam, the first Imam, Shiite Imam.
Okay.
And there are many other items that were transmitted by the Imams. The science of letterism or gematria in Islam was transmitted by the Imams, first by Ali, then by the sixth Imam, Jafar al-Sadiq, alayhi salam. And so on and so forth. Now, the Sunni Orthodoxy has a problem with this stuff. And as you move into the more fundamentalist Sunni communities, such as the Salafiyah and the Wahhabis, I mean, they are just completely, crazy.
Yeah.
When it gets to the world of the occult in general. But what we have to define, I actually spent about a good, hour in my lecture in Berlin in 2018 at the Culture Conference explaining this stuff, is that because there is no neutral word in Arabic for magic, right? The way that the tradition looks at this issue is that it makes a distinction between ruhaniya, which you can translate as either, literally as spirituality or technically as theurgy, and then sihr, which is technically black sorcery and magic. So the distinction is between theurgy and goetia. So goetia is verboten in as a practice, if but theurgy is at the basis of the esoteric, not just the esoteric, but the mainstream practice. You can even, look at the movements of the salat, the movements of prayer, of the canonical prayer as a form of theurgy, because they are, you're basically reenacting the cosmogenesis, as it were, through the acts of the salat. Now, many conventional Muslims have no idea about any of this stuff, but within the text of whether Sufism or even the esoteric Shiite, 12 or Ismaili text, all of this stuff has always been explained of what all of this stuff means. And letterism, the science of the letters, is at the center of all of this. So the approach to the, understanding the cosmological science of letterism is the key, to the craft.
Yeah.
But like I said, within the mainstream orthodoxy, especially now as we move forward into modernism and postmodernism, not only has it been de-emphasized, but it has been completely shunted aside completely, which is a very strange phenomenon, because even within normative Sunnism until probably about 50, 60, 70 years ago, because the Sufi orders within the Sunni world were still somewhat dominant as the representative of Sunnism, there was a more nuanced approach to the question of magic. But as we've moved into modernity, and especially as the Saudi petrodollars managed to infiltrate itself all throughout the Sunni world by propping up the Wahhabi ideology and building mosques and money and that sort of thing, now all of this has been pushed to the side. But even with them, which I find very interesting, despite all their hard talk against magic and the occult, they still have a practice they call ruqyah. And ruqyah is usually used for purposes of exorcism, where you read a verse of the Quran over and over and over and over and over again. Very similar to how exorcisms are conducted. And then this is supposed to drive out the entity that is possessing the subject.
Sure. Yeah, I'm even thinking, I've definitely come across stuff, and maybe this is coming across from Sufism a bit, but even within Sunnism, where you say a certain verse or a certain set of words a certain number of times, and it gives you this, or it helps you protect you from that. And it's funny because it will get called a prayer because it's coming from the Islamic context. But if you were to put that in any other context, it'd be a spell because you're repeating an incantation, expecting some kind of worldly result from it.
But here's the thing. These people who are saying this stuff are not paying attention to the very language. The word for prayer in Arabic is dua, right?
Yeah.
Dua comes from the root to call, da'a.
Yeah.
Right? So when you are making a dua, you're making an invocation.
Yeah.
Right? It's there right in the language of what a prayer is in Arabic. So, the language and the context of the praxis, if you would, is already assuming the magical universe. And the last two surahs of the Quran, 113 and 114, were specifically revealed to counteract the influence of black sorcery. Which means that the Quran and the revelation of Islam already accepts as a fundamental axiom and premise the enchanted universe. Yeah,
definitely. And just to go back to something you mentioned, so if I'm understanding right, the difference between theurgy and Goetia is that connection to the divine in theurgy and working with the divine?
Yes, it is good you asked that question. What does theurgy do? Theurgy seeks to presence the divine, right, in all of its emanations and theophanies and whatnot. One of the classic texts of at least pagan theurgy is the text of Iamblichus on the Mysteries, right, where he explains exactly what he means when he's queried, especially by Porphyry, about the use of statues and what these statues represent and what they in themselves are imbued with the energeia of the divine, the answers that are given. In Islam, there's a very similar understanding around the divine names, right? So the divine names in themselves are imbued with the entire theurgical power, right? So theurgy seeks the presence of the divine through these names and what each of these names instantiate. And these names also come with emanations and theophanies and self-disclosures of angels. You asked this question, how important angels are. Angels are central to this work. So to give you an example, if you open a text of an occult text such as Al-Buni's Shams al-Ma'arif, the great son of Gnosis, most of the workings that he's offering with magic squares are presencing muwakkilun, or guardian spirits or guardian angels around a specific divine name.
Okay. Interesting. And I know a lot of people watching this from my side when I upload it are definitely coming from the tarot world, and a lot of this is probably like going quite deep for them. But you did mention a couple of things, but there's probably quite a few things within the Islamic occult that would surprise people who aren't that familiar with Islam and just have an outside view and a certain perspective of Islam. But there's definitely, so you mentioned talismans, astrology, using verses magically as well.
Yes.
Are there any other like main, I guess?
Well, there's a lot of different things. We could spend the whole day just talking about every element. But see, this is the thing that I think your Australian audience and just your general audience needs to understand is that the Islamic world is not a monolith. When we from here on out start speaking of the Islamic world, we should probably speak of it as in the term that Marshall Hodgson coined from the University of Chicago, Islamicate civilization or Islamaic civilization rather than Islam as a monolith. And this would also be defying the fundamentalist attempt to try to, basically take control over the whole narrative of 1400 years. Because within this Islamaic and Islamicate civilization, there are many different tendencies. And it has been that way from the very beginning. And the Shia tendency, especially in whatever permutation, has always been, in one way or another, the kind of the gatekeeper and the caretaker of the esoteric tradition. And that is because, like I mentioned, most of the imams of Shiism, whether we're talking from the 12 or the Ismaili angle, were the transmitter of the arcana. So the arcana actually comes from the prophet's own family. And the prophet's own experience of revelation and of the archangel Gabriel is an occult vision, is a very visionary experience, and so on and so forth. So all of these things need to kind of be taken into context. Now, people who read Arabic or have some training in reading Arabic, when you read the Quran in whatever of its 7 readings, the one thing that strikes immediately is the the occult resonance of a lot of these verses, right? Translations don't often, capture that. But a good example is, like, for example, the verses or the surahs of the Quran that begin with the disconnected letters. So they are being coded. So these verses themselves at their very beginning are being coded with certain letters, which immediately tells you that there is something else going on here.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I really like that idea. The idea that Islam's not a monolith is something that, like, the exact terminology that I've used before as well, without hearing it from you, I think. But yeah, a really good, simple example of this is I'm initiated into Hazrat Anayat Khan's lineage, and you'll come across Sunni Muslims who are like, music's haram. And we're over here, we've got this Murshid who's a musician, and like all of the practices revolve around music. So yeah, it's good for people to be aware that there is that diversity there, and it might not be the majority, but there's definitely a lot of color in there, definitely a lot of diversity. And Islam spread across, Africa and like Asia, and like a lot of the local cultures mixed in with that as well, didn't they? And you get the practices coming in there as well.
Yeah. So it's not a monolith. And I think, it would serve everybody, especially in the West, to stop giving credibility to the narratives that are coming from the Salafists and the Wahhabis, etc. Because it's not like that. They're trying to basically push everybody out or marginalize everybody else. Whereas, until probably about 80 years ago, they themselves were the minority, and they still are by population.
I had a conversation recently with a friend of mine who has a family member who's a Salafi, and basically the point I came to was that the Salafis are, as much as they like to think they are going back to some golden age, they're actually innovators themselves in a lot of ways.
They are. They're 100% innovators.
So very ironic.
Yeah. And that is a whole can of worms that maybe I should explore with,
that's not where
in another podcast.
Conversation. Well, the next thing I was going to bring up, something that I know, if people are vaguely familiar with the esoteric in the Islamic world, sometimes they'll come across and be quite fascinated by the idea of jinn.
Yes.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what jinn are and like how they play into?
Absolutely. Well, if you have any reading experience in the Western occult ceremonial magic tradition, the jinn are the elementals, right? They're animate though. So just like the elementals, where we have races divided into the 4 elements, the same thing happens within the world of the jinn. Now, there's a massive amount of literature on the jinn in Arabic in the occult manuscripts, and not all of them agree with one another. But one thing that most of them agree is that we're talking about different races of jinn. And only 3 or 4 major texts actually divide them into the elements, just like the Western. So this has been a question for me as to how the Golden Dawn and those folks came up with the notion of the elementals being, these subtle beings and entities that are divided into the 4 elements, because you have this in few of the texts within the Islamic world. But that's basically who they are, the elementals. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And you mentioned angels earlier, and so like you call on them, like invoke them. And what's the relationship of I guess, because we have a wide audience possibly listening to this after we've recorded it. What's the relationship between angels and the divine? Because that's quite different in Islam compared to maybe Christianity, where a lot of people might think that, not to like upset anyone here, but their grandmother is an angel watching over them. But in Islam, it's quite different to what a lot of, I guess, secular Western people might conceive of as an angel, isn't it?
Well, it's actually not too dissimilar to the notions that exist in Christian Neoplatonism, right? Such as, the pseudo-Dionysius, the Aryakabite, and his text, The Mystical Hierarchies. Basically, angels, and this is where Ibn Arabi it becomes quite important. Angels are instantiations of the theophanies of the One. So we should speak more precisely in terms of angelophanies rather than anything else. So this is where this whole concept of fallen angels that emerges out of the Book of Enoch originally has no place in the cosmology of Islam, because angels are basically extensions of the light of God. Right. So the light of God in itself is not separate from it. So as we move down the various hierarchies of being, these emanations and theophanies, concretize and take on the forms of all the realms that they go through. And in the realm immediately above our own, which in the Islamic cosmology is the realm of Malakut, which is the angelic realm. They take on the form of angels and are multiple.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe to clarify for people who aren't that familiar with it too, in Islam, it's, I think, you know, the majority view that angels have no free will, right? That's the difference between humanity and the angels. They're kind of directed by God.
Because they're an extension of God.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, but even in the names of the angel, which actually comes from the original Hebrew, for example, the angels in Islam are Jibrail. Jibrail is Gabriel, right?
Yeah.
Gabriel in Hebrew means the power of God, the power of El, right? So even in the Hebrew, you know, going as far back as, you know, the system of the Hechalot, the Merkava mysticism, you know, there was an understanding that the angels were the instantiations or the theophanies of you know, the Hashem, the name, and so on and so forth. It is because I think the more sophisticated, you know, Neoplatonic angelology is now kind of the domain of a very elite, philosophically inclined kind of audience, that at least the New Age has taken the concept of angels and kind of reify it beyond anything else, so that angels become just basically an extension of anthropomorphic beings. And it's very ironic because this is the same understanding that you find within fundamentalist conceptions of what angels are, and the very literalist theology of these things. But in the more refined metaphysics and Neoplatonism and whatnot, we're talking about completely much higher order of reality about what these things mean.
That's good. I hope we didn't offend any tarot people out there with their angel decks. It's all good. But it's interesting too. I quite often have conversations with someone I know about, we share stuff back and forth about jinn and angels, and especially angels. The idea of biblical angels is actually really different to what most people think of when they think of angels. You got these wheels with hundreds of eyes and stuff. And in the Bible, it's always be not afraid. And there's a reason they're saying that. Yeah, very different.
I've actually, you know, and I'm very open about this because I've written about it many places and done interviews. When I was using psychoactive plants for purposes of vision, especially with the DMT, this is precisely the kind of things that you see, the stuff that is explained, that is depicted, like, for example, in the vision of Ezekiel. These are precisely the kind of visions that you behold of these beings. Wheels with many eyes and many wings, etc.
Interesting. And I didn't have that on our question list, but now that you brought it up, it might be of interest to people because it's a very unique attribute of the Fatimiyya Sufi order, isn't it? The use of plant medicines, ayahuasca, and I actually first heard of you in a book about that. So did you want to say a little bit on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we hold the Hayoma. We don't use the ayahuasca anymore. We use Hayoma because we use the Syrian rue rather than the copy as the main base ingredient. And these are sacraments. So, you know, we don't rely exclusively upon them. And no thanks to the COVID, we haven't been able to, you know, have proper gatherings as we used to have. But yes, that these plants are extremely sacred to us. They are the fruits of the mother herself. And they are healing agents, but they have to be respected. Whether we're talking about, you know, the Hayoma, or whether we're talking about even cannabis or the psilocybin mushrooms, etc. So our attitude is, you know, we take these as sacraments, not as party drugs. And the attitude of utter respect towards these things is paramount, because these are also gateways and portals to the other side. If you would, to open the vision, the doors of perception to this other side.
Very interesting. Very interesting. So the other thing, this is probably where my audience will get quite interested, is you've been creating a tarot deck, and I think I told you over Facebook Messenger that I stumbled across links between Ibn Arabi and the major arcana, and I was posting stuff on my Instagram. Someone has to make a deck out of this. Like, I want to make a deck. Like, where's an artist? And then I actually came across you were actually working on it. I was really happy because it's absolutely beautiful. I've got a couple of the artworks here that I printed out. So
that is our full card. Yeah, that's clear. That is our full card. The first card is the major arcana.
Yeah, very nice. I love the artwork, and we've got the Priestess as well.
Yes, this card is known as the Imam Creatrix, and this is the second card of the major arcana. And I should mention the fact that in this deck, the High Priestess is actually the second card. And there's a reason for this, and this goes back to a dispute that has existed in the Kabbalah for a very long time, as to which of the Sephirot comes second. Is it Chokhmah or Binah? And one of the schools of Kabbalah that I've read quite extensively on, the school of Gerona, these were radical Kabbalists. They actually believed that putting Chokhmah after Kether was a mistake, and that Binah is actually the second of the Sephirot, of the Tree of Life. Now, I don't use the conventional Sephirotic Tree of Life because
I've got
in 2000,
I don't know if people see that.
Yes, in 2005, as a result of I did a new model of the tree was revealed to me, consisting of 13 spheres and 36 pathways within the tree, which brings the whole thing to 49 paths in total. And this model of the tree functions as the template for this tarot that is now emerging.
And so it's called the Nur Tarot, which means light
Tarot
in Arabic.
Yes.
And so from what I was reading, it's going to have 13 cards per suit, so a few more cards, so it adds up to 88 cards in total.
So we have 28 in total, 28 major arcana cards.
Yep.
There's a middle arcana consisting of 8 cards that represents each of the sigils, Ogdoadic sigils of the greatest name. And then 4 suits in air, fire, water, and earth, consisting of 13 cards each.
Yeah, awesome. And so the 28 majors, they correspond to the 28 lunar mansions and the names.
Yes.
Yeah, and so each card has that correspondence to a divine name and one of the Arabic letters. And the Arabic letters, you said this at the start of our conversation, but it's not like an English letter necessarily. It's more like the Hebrew, where you've got the mystical properties of each letter. They're basically seen as the creative forces of.
It's exactly the same principle, except that Hebrew has 22 letters and Arabic has 28 letters. And with Arabic, so therefore it corresponds to the cycle of the lunar mansions. So, this, what I'm working out right now, which pretty much is done in a sketch, is these cards and the movement of the lunar mansion, and then what these lunar mansions and their correspondences can tell us in a particular reading. So this is I'm going into the actual meaning of divination itself. And inshallah, in the next couple of years, this all will be finished. I mean, I am saturated with other projects, but what's interesting is that all of the current projects I'm involved in writing, in one way or another, are reflecting the final product of this Nur Tarot as well.
Sure, it's all coming together. I know you've probably got lots of people who message you from like me, being like, "What's coming out? When are you offering courses? When can I study this with you?" So
it will happen. It will happen. Folks have to be patient. Our artist right now, who's doing the major arcana cards, he's involved in another project right now, so he can't get back to what he's doing, but he said he will shortly. So once those 28 are finished, then I actually have to then complete the final draft of a book that is based on the book that will then be about the tarot. And this book is called the Liber Nomini Angelis, and it's basically the angelology of the Tree of Reality, the 13 sphere, 36 pathway tree, which a draft of which I wrote in 2007, and then subsequently went through various more drafts. And then the final draft will be then the kind of the precursor to the book of the Tree of Hermes, which will be the book about the Nur Tarot itself.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I can't wait. And it might that time frame might just give me enough time to get my head around all of it a little bit.
Sure. One thing I would encourage people, that are interested in the system is to, learn at least, if nothing else, the Arabic alphabet in its numerological sequence, because that is going to be very key into all of it. And so this system, like I said, is going to be divination par excellence. That means that theurgy, the actual exercise of theurgy using the divine names, is going to be central in the actual divination process itself. And there's good like tables of correspondences out there online that you can get, like, start memorizing. So do you want to like, if people are interested in with this deck, I guess, like, they'll find you at
you've got a blog spot, and
yeah, and there, I have a presence.
I'll let you say.
I have a presence on Facebook. Obviously, how you found me. I do have an Instagram account. I just don't use it that often. You can find me through my blog. You can find me through my Facebook. I have a couple of different emails you can email me through. I'm around, so I'm not, And then there's the Fatimiyya page itself on Facebook that you can always contact me through that as well.
And I'll just say, like, having found your group on Islamic Theology on Facebook, for anyone who's interested in it, it's a really good resource, because you go on there and you've got a post about the text to go through, the introductory stuff, and you can just sit there reading through and getting your head around stuff in a somewhat sequential order. Like, you can start taking information in. So it's really good. And then you've got thousands and thousands of pages on astrology and stuff posted up in the files, and it'll definitely keep people busy if they're interested in this stuff. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
You're very welcome.
It's been really good. Thanks a lot.
Very welcome. You're welcome.
All right. See you later.